Welcome to Everyday Greatness, a nice little show proudly brought to you by major sponsor ARA Group, one of Australia's greatest supporters of community projects. Everyday Greatness is a show hosted by a real human being, talking to some real people about real human issues that will help make you feel proud again of simply being a good solid Joe bag of donuts. Here's your host, Barnaby Howarth.
Welcome to Everyday Greatness, and thanks for listening. This is a show designed to celebrate the greatness in living an everyday life. So grab a drink, kick your feet up, and settle in. Before I start today, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia. I think acknowledging Indigenous Australians is more important than just reading from a generic impersonal script. So I'd like to honour the traditional owners of the land from the heart. I love being an Australian, so I'd like to acknowledge those who came before us, those we share the land with today, and those who follow us. As a white Australian, I'm flat out embarrassed at some of the things that have happened in this country in the past. So I'd like to acknowledge that I feel terrible for any pain that's been caused. But I'd also like to acknowledge how beautiful Aboriginal Australian culture, your past, your place in today's society, and your future are. Thank you for sharing your country with us. Diversity and inclusion in the workplace, in the sporting arena, and in general society is like making a toffee with no sugar. You could just close your eyes and throw in any odd sweetener, but it would most likely end up an epic fail and shrivel into a tiny ball of fake syrup. Or you could do your research on the less well-known sugar substitutes. Give the less obvious choice a crack, and you might find your end goal becomes a reality that would have been better had you not looked outside the box. Finding alternatives to the obvious choice can quite often lead to unexpected gems. It isn't about closing your eyes and just flat out hoping things turn out. Doing some research and trying different ways can lead you to sweeteners that sometimes end up better than the obvious, old school, predictable method. And you might end up with a better toffee than you would have had you gone the obvious choice. My guests today, site leader for the Australia and New Zealand Adobe Proud Employee Network at Adobe Australia, Eleanor Rugg, and Hall of Fame basketballer Steve CARFINO, both know that the world hasn't always been willing to give the less obvious choice a crack. But they also know that times they are a-changin'. So I'm going to have a crack at interviewing both of them. Not knowing whether you're going to be accepted into the room you walk into can be a daunting prospect. When Eleanor Rugg walked into the door on her first day at work at Adobe, she was nervous that she might not be accepted as a gay woman. Now Ellie is the site leader for the Australia and New Zealand Adobe Proud Employee Network for lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender colleagues to talk about life issues and business. Sport is often used as a metaphor for business practices, and that's no more true than in Eleanor's situation at her local AFL club, the Pennant Hills Demons. The Demons started off as a ragtag bunch of misfits. They played in Sydney's second division, and they recruited players by having clubmen stand on a main road and wave in cars with Victorian licence plates. They are now a professional, successful First Division clubs with 11 teams, including 5 women's teams, of which Eleanor is the captain of Premier Division. The Pennant Hills Demons mirror business diversity and inclusion by making sure that everybody feels accepted in the room they walk into. It's my pleasure to say that Eleanor Rugg joins me on Everyday Greatness. Eleanor, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Not a problem. How nervous were you when you first walked in the door for your first day of work, not knowing if you'd be welcomed as a gay woman?
Pretty nervous. I think I'd previously only really worked in hospitality, which has some of its own challenges and around diversity and lifestyle. And then walking into my first real corporate role, it was it was an exceptionally nervous part of my life, and I was still kind of in my early 20s, and that part of my life I was still coming to terms with. And you were still constantly having to have those conversations with people. And I was very thankful and grateful at the time. A good friend of mine worked there, and I think 2 or 3 days in, I said, "Oh, mate, do you reckon, like, do I have to keep this a secret? Will people care?" And I think she flat out laughed in my face and said, "Mate, no one will give any, no one will care at all." And it was really grateful to hear that from her. And I think over time we've, where I've worked, and I know a lot of other corporate businesses are putting a lot of emphasis on having diverse people in senior roles. And now, 6 years on into my corporate working life, I do see people in very senior positions who are, of the queer community, and that's very encouraging. And I think it makes it a lot easier for the people coming into corporate workplaces today than it did for me 6 years ago.
Has your sexuality ever been a barrier to things you've wanted to achieve in business?
I think, I don't know if it's a barrier, but I think it's definitely something that I've thought about a lot. So prior to joining Adobe, where I worked now, I was also offered a role in a small financial planning firm. And so that was kind of where, my career was at a crossroads. Did I go into tech or would I go into financial planning? And I met with the owner of this business, and they were saying, "Oh, us and our wives love to go away for golfing weekends. I'm sure your boyfriend would love to come." And in those conversations, I just was like, I don't know how well they would really accept me. Like, it was from whilst they were lovely people, and they didn't know this about me, so maybe I'm prejudging, but I definitely didn't feel comfortable in that moment being 25, 30 years younger than these people, kind of, letting them into that part of my life. And it's probably held me back in some instances, especially when I was younger, just because you just don't know how people are going to react. And that's, that's definitely a sad aspect of, I guess, life. And there's been a lot of good growth in the last kind of 10 to 15 years. But yeah, I think every time someone always asks me, "Oh, do you have a boyfriend or a husband?" It's still kind of, my heart sort of goes and like, "Oh, actually, my girlfriend or like my soon-to-be wife." You just don't know, and that's the fear.
So, speaking of good changes in the last decade, tell me a little bit about Adobe Proud. How and why was it set up, and who does it support, and how does it support them?
Yeah, definitely. So we're obviously head office out of San Jose in California, and that's a very progressive part of the world, in Silicon Valley and kind of the San Francisco area. But for a long time, we've had what's called employee networks. So we've got BEN, so the Black Employee Network, Adobe for Women, Adobe Pride. In the US, they've got veterans. Obviously, that's not as kind of relevant over here for us, same as BEN. I think like Latino network. We've got a diversity network as well. So these are networks that have been created for people to, I guess, join. And whether you're an ally or you're part of that network yourself, or perhaps a family member is, it's just a way for us to raise awareness, and also, really to support people in the process of kind of in corporate life. It's really good to know that you've got people, similar to you. And so at the start of last year, just before COVID lockdown, we decided to launch the Adobe Pride Network in Sydney, so in our Sydney office. And that's across Australia and New Zealand satellite offices. So so it's just it's a community. It's a place that we can run events, work with our peers, especially allies. So I think we've obviously, the demographic here in our Sydney team is very small from an LGBT plus community, but it's really around educating and helping our allies so they can also understand how they can. So it's been kicked off. We launched at last year's Mardi Gras in the office. Haven't had a whole lot of face-to-face events in the last 2 years for obvious reasons, but I know everyone's looking forward to getting back and being able to do some more things in the future.
Mm-hmm. So, for those people in the world who are strictly about business profitability and bottom line results, how does a business being focused on diversity and inclusion, how does that contribute to their bottom line success?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that's something businesses really grapple with these days. Like, why should we spend money on making sure our employees feel welcome and happy? And I think, that's the best way you get the best out of your employees. If you're going to hire people and pay money for them, you want them to bring their best self to work. You don't want them to be hiding themselves or unsure of themselves, because I think they're just not going to be as productive. They're not going to be as comfortable, and they're just not going to give the best effort they possibly can to the business, because they're not going to feel as connected. I think I feel very connected to where I work. I feel valued. I feel trusted. And I think that goes a long way for how much commitment I'm willing to give back to the business.
Mm-hmm. You talked earlier about Adobe's diversity and inclusion groups that they support. What are some of the other practical groups that support diversity and inclusion in the world in other businesses?
Ooh, I'm not really sure about a lot of other businesses. I know that, for example, I think when it comes to Adobe Pride, obviously that's probably what I'm most connected to, especially in other businesses. So I know when you think about Mardi Gras over here for Sydney, the ANZ Bank is one of the main sponsors, and I know they go they do a lot of investment in that event and with their persons as well. The Commonwealth Bank, I know they do a lot of things, and these are really big public events that you see kind of doing that. And I think if you remember back in, I think it was 2017 when it was the marriage equality vote, and I actually remember at the time they had a big alliance group of businesses brought out a single page ad in maybe it was the Financial Review or Sydney Morning Herald or something, and it had all these businesses on there, and they were all businesses that were publicly putting their names out in support of the yes vote. And seeing that kind of, for me, actually shows us how invested a lot of these businesses are in their people and their diverse networks. And they may not have had networks at that point, but I'm sure now they probably do, or they're a lot closer to it. So it's great. I think it's very public these days, and it's a selling point. If you're looking to go into a business, one of the questions you're going to ask: what's your diversity and inclusion policy like? What's your culture like? And these are the things that I think bring top talent into an organisation.
Mm-hmm. Now, being authentic in business today is a desired trait, but a lot of older generations don't understand how being authentic can be a thing. Shouldn't we all just be who we are? Are people more inclined, though, to be authentic in today's business world now that they know that they'll be included at companies with their diversity and inclusions policies?
Yeah, I absolutely think that. I think because also the workplace is a lot more diverse than it was 50 years ago. 50 years ago, it was probably a lot of men that looked like yourself and maybe a handful of women that looked like me. And that was probably it. And now I think the multicultural layer of Adobe of Australia, has changed. So the workplace is changing. And I think you work with a lot of different and fascinating and interesting and wonderful people. And I think that allows people to be themselves, kind of in more aspects. I also think the world between work and non-work is molding. I think with social media, people engage with their colleagues a lot more outside of the workplace than they used to. And I think that makes it harder to be inauthentic at work. So, a lot of people I work with know that I play sports. Like, they see that I play football. They see me come to work with bruises all over my arms because I got tackled really hard by someone. And I think if you kept that layer away or you hid that from the workplace, I think it becomes obvious, and it probably would make it a lot harder to connect with your peers as well.
So, speaking about your footy career, you are an authentic leader yourself, captaining the Pennant Hills Demons women's team. When you were a little girl, there were no women's Aussie rules teams. Did you ever think that one day you might captain one?
God, no. I played football or soccer growing up at the state level up until I was maybe 21 or 22, and I loved that. And I was also in those instances generally kind of a captain or vice captain. And then I think I quite got into footy. I think it was 04 when Swans won one of their last flags.
05, Eleanor. That was so.
I'm a giant girl. Come on, let's not have this argument right now. And I remember watching that game, and kind of that was probably, I think, the first time that I really was like, wow, this is actually a pretty cool sport and a pretty cool game. And my parents, whilst rugby league fans or football fans, started kind of watching it at that point as well. And I slowly started to enjoy watching it, and then kind of stopped playing soccer and really missed playing competitive sport, but also at quite a high level. I was still playing soccer, but at kind of Div 3 level, which is a little bit below what I'd been playing for quite a while. And that's when, the first year that the Penno team were advertising for a women's team, I thought, why not get involved, challenge myself, and also get, re-engage in my local community again. I'd previously always been playing soccer in a team that was not close to where I lived. And so there was a lot of really fascinating aspects, but I don't think I ever thought I'd be playing it or half decent. So it's actually probably been one of the biggest life-changing experiences for me as an adult, joining Peno and what's kind of come out of that.
Very cool. So how does it make you feel knowing that little girls today will grow up thinking they might captain a footy team one day because of trailblazers like you?
Well, I think it's great. I wouldn't say I'm maybe a trailblazer. I think there's a lot of women before me, and when we go to AFLW, it's great to see that, and some of the women out there. But I think a lot of it also comes down to now. I think parents also see it as a viable option for their sons and daughters, and are encouraging in that sense. So I think that's actually probably been one of the biggest changes that I've seen. When I was in Melbourne earlier this year, my partner and I went to watch I think it was the Pies versus St Kilda in the AFLW, and the amount of like older brothers or dads with their younger sisters or daughters or grandpas or whatever with their, I think is awesome, and that shows that I think again 15 years ago they wouldn't take their kids to a girls' game because they don't want to watch it. But I think that whole mindset's changed as well, and that's what's amazing. Like there's just so many more people interested and engaged in the game, and it's just it's going to just keep going up and up.
Very true. Now, I want to ask you some questions as Eleanor Rugg, the Australian woman who works and plays footy on the weekend. What's the proudest thing you've seen one of your teammates do on or off the field?
On or off the field. On or off the field. I think for us, it was probably a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, we had one of our our players actually switch clubs, which is never fun. Which is never fun when you have someone leave, and it was a lifestyle choice. It was too far to travel, which I totally get. But I think one of the proudest things that has reminded me of like the culture that we built in the women's program and at Peno was that the second she came back to the club when we played her, everyone was all over her with love, and she was happy to see everyone. And the way that she still kept engaging with the club from the time she left, it's very cemented the fact that we actually have what we've created with our club and with our culture has actually kind of come to fruition. And the fact that she was one of our better players, and we will always welcome her back. But the fact that I think the relationships really stayed there has made me really proud of the program that we've developed, and also her as well. Like it's it's never easy to leave something when even if it's best for you. But I think that's kind of something that's always been really important for me, is the way we go about things off and on the field.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the social causes that you're passionate about today? Black Lives Matter, marriage equality, gender pay equality?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Black Lives Matter is something that I think Australia needs to have a much deeper, harder look at. I think we've obviously gotten on the bandwagon in respect to the issues in the United States, but I think we're completely forgetting about that we have a whole other range of issues, especially in regional Australia. The way we treat our Indigenous community, as well as the way I'm sure that we treat some of our, non-Australian born Australians. Like, how are we supporting people who don't look like you and me? And I think that's a massive problem that we need to move forward from. And I think Australia really needs to address the fact that we are, we've got a casual racism problem in this country. I think for me, I think pay equality, absolutely. And I think just, equality in general around that. I think COVID has really highlighted that. You've got the people that are really struggling, and they're the people that can't afford to work from home. They're the people that have to be in customer-facing roles versus people that, I'm very thankful and grateful that I have a job that enables me to work from home. So I'm a much lower risk from getting COVID, but a lot of people aren't. And I think we need to work on how do we support people like that. I think for me, climate change is a really big thing as well. So I think we need to really start thinking about how we're going to protect this world. It's the only one we've got, for our kids and for their kids and those kids. Oh, you're on mute, Barnaby. Barnaby, you're on mute. I can't hear you.
Sorry, my bad.
That's okay, there you go.
I said you're just a young kid still. Are you passionate enough? Are you passionate enough that you go to rallies, protests, and donate money to these social causes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the monetary donation, that's definitely something that we, especially in the last 2 years, I think is the safest way to get involved. And I think for me, it's around, like what are practical ways, signing petitions. I think it doesn't take very long to do something like that, but it can often make a big difference. And I think, yeah, when appropriate, going to rallies and those sorts of things are really important. I think for me, the main thing that I've really taken the last kind of 18 months, 2 years around is really education. So, how am I educating myself? Am I getting my news from always the same resource? No, I should be getting it from multiple different things. And that enables me to have constructive conversations with people that I might disagree with. But I think there's a long way to go, and I think we've got to just kind of keep pushing forward.
Hmm. There's been a huge shift in managing people over the last 2 decades, which is perfectly summed up in sports leadership. People used to be able to manage teams by treating the team as one entity and delivering the same message in the same manner to every person. But these days, messages need to be tailored to each individual person. How do you get your messages across at footy as the captain of the team? Are you an aggressive screamer, a gentle encourager, or a lead by example sort of captain?
I think it comes down to knowing what type of motivation your players feed off. We've got, especially in Aussie rules, you've got, for women, you've got 21 players on a game day, and every 21, every person is different, and they're going to respond to feedback differently. And as a captain, I've been grateful that a lot of the players have been around for a couple of years now, and we're all quite close. And so I know them well, but you need to know what motivates them. I know that there are some players in our team that I can just say, mate, that was shit, be better. And they'll be like, yeah, I know, I'm trying. Or there are other people that you need to go and, give them a pat on the back and be like, I know you're trying your best, just keep going, it'll come, it'll happen. Or something, and you really need to know your audience. And I think that's been part of kind of my success, both from a corporate standpoint and sporting, is knowing how to do that. I think I definitely lead by example as well. I've certainly put my body in the line of fire a few times. I think a couple of years ago I broke my cheekbone and kept playing, which didn't bode well for me afterwards. But I think those sorts of things are super important. And at the end of the day, you want to be a leader that people want to follow. They don't necessarily need to be your best mate, but I think they need to, kind of say, okay, we think what she's doing is the right thing, and let's align ourselves with how she's, stepping forward.
Hmm. So, which method of leadership do you prefer when you're following?
I think collaborative. I think a collaborative leader, someone who I don't, like being dictated down to. There are some instances where that has to happen, and that, from a football perspective, don't be a dick to the ref. Yep, great, no problem. That makes sense to me. That's a rule that everyone should follow. But in other instances, I think it makes more sense to say, okay, what do you guys think about this? How do we go about this? Or let's try this. Did it work? Did it not work? I think that's, especially when you spend a lot of time with people and it's not a one-off event, I do think that's the best way to get people to be motivated, especially in today's age where, we want to have a voice.
Eleanor Rugg, I want to thank you so much for joining me on Everyday Greatness, and I wish you all the best in your endeavours with Penno and at business. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to see you again, and hopefully we'll be sharing a beer soon.
Before I welcome our next guest, Steve CARFINO, I want to acknowledge our sponsor for this episode, Cherry Civil. Stephen Cherry is a friend of mine from high school, and I really like to acknowledge and appreciate his efforts to sponsor this episode. You can find more details about Cherry Civil at www.cherrycivil.com.au. Thanks again. When Dan Aykroyd appeared in Trading Places in 1983 and in one scene wore blackface, African-American basketballer Steve CARFINO was dominating for the University of Iowa Hawkeyes basketball team. At the same time, he was getting so many Valentine's Day cards, his teammates couldn't get changed because all of Steve's mail was piled up in front of their lockers. A lot has changed over the years, especially in race relations. Steve's kids, Clayton and Bronte, are growing up in a world where there's been an Aboriginal Australian of the Year and a black US president. Steve has worked in the Australian media since retiring from the Sydney Kings in 1991 So he's seen firsthand the changing landscape in race relations in sport. It started with the Negro Leagues in the US, where black baseballers had to form their own league as they were banned from playing in the professional white leagues. That was until Jackie Robinson broke down that racial barrier. Then it moved on to Tiger Woods, a black golfer who members didn't want to admit to some of their golf courses because of the colour of his skin. But Tiger broke down that racial barrier and became one of the world's greatest ever golf players. There are still people breaking down racial barriers. Adam Goodes, Paddy Mills, and the South African rugby union team. And they're doing it thanks to trailblazers like Steve CARFINO. Steve doesn't take himself too seriously these days. He's just an everyday Joe bag of donuts trying to get through life as well as he can. But in not taking himself too seriously, Steve is setting the example for other young children of colour to live a life full of opportunity. Steve still works in the media. He does basketball coaching and he's even given stand-up comedy a crack. But Steve is just an everyday bloke. But in being an everyday bloke, Steve is a serious role model for those young black children who might not know what their role is in today's society. Kids like Clayton and Bronte. Clayton and Bronte are living lives full of opportunity thanks to people like Steve CARFINO. And Steve is helping those kids dream as big as their imaginations can take them. They realise now they can be Australian of the Year, US President, or even an NBL Hall of Fame basketballer. So I'd like to welcome Steve CARFINO to Everyday Greatness. Steve, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Barnaby. Dan, that's quite an introduction.
Growing up in Bellflower, California, tell us what America was like back then. Was it made very clear that black people could aim for certain things and white people for different things?
I think it was a struggle, because it was a movement that was, on its way up. It wasn't that long before, it wasn't that long ago that blacks were segregated, like had to sit at the back of the bus. And so I heard firsthand stories of, my parents growing up in that era. So, and that's the best way to hear about things, by word of mouth, definitely back then, because, there was no internet. So that was where you got a lot of your knowledge from. You're sitting around at barbecues. We first moved from New York, from Amityville, New York. We moved to Compton, California. So we moved to a predominantly black neighborhood. And so, we'd go to the barbecues and we'd hear some stories, firsthand about, like say, for example, my father not being served at restaurants, not being allowed in people's homes. And, I didn't really grow up with the severity of that. There was like racial, overtones, but there was only a couple of times where I wasn't allowed in someone's house. They were like, "Oh, he's not, welcome in our home." So my friends, we all slept overnight. We went to a guy's house in Chicago. We slept in the van. I didn't even realize that was the reason why we had to sleep out in the van, but they all rallied around me and said, "Look, we don't want to go in unless Steve's welcome as well." So that's only happened to me a handful of times where it was just blatant, where somebody came out and said, "You're not welcome in this restaurant," or "You're not welcome in this home," or asking me if I'm a member, looking me up and down at a golf course because they didn't want anybody of color on their golf course, but like I knew better not to dress properly, so I had all the perfect gear on to play golf. So as we go through the generations, and my kids have they have benefits as well. Like when I was a kid, being racially mixed was really tricky, because it was like you weren't really accepted from either side. Now my kids get called exotic, because they're racially mixed, and they get the benefits of looking unique, of having curly hair, of having full lips, of having a round backside. Like those are the things that are really kind of glorified in today's society. So they get their perks as well. But, with me, the kids have, the kids also have a unique set of circumstances where they're faced with, say, for example, um, a rap song comes on. I know I'm going to say some rappers that are old and they're probably irrelevant now, but Notorious B.I.G. or Tupac, and they say the N word a lot in their songs, and so my kids were growing up during that era when they started to have their own musical taste, and they'd have those songs playing, or their friends would have those songs playing, and so the N word would be, they would sing right along to it, and so I just said, look, that's kind of if that makes you feel uncomfortable, then maybe you shouldn't throw out a mixed message of your own, like just leave that word alone. When that word comes up in the song, just don't sing with it, and just say to your friends, look, it's not cool for you to say that. So, like, I'd appreciate it if I don't say it. So, I really don't want you to say it either. So, it's an ever changing, minefield, with the political correctness now, I think, is completely out of hand. I think that people are just not even using any common sense when it comes to that. But I think that, when you judge those things, I think Ice Cube probably put it the best. I saw him do it on an interview with that political comedian. I think it's Mar, I think. And he said that, look, I don't really think that white people should use that because that's our word. And I don't use it at all. So I just think that I think you're throwing a mixed message. But he said that when he hears people say it, there's like a sting to it, like two people can say the same word and it has a completely different meaning. And so I think that, like when I judge people on what they do and what they say, I judge them on their intention. What is their intention when they say it? And I can usually tell by when people say things what their intention is. If their intention is to cause malice or, animosity, have a bit of a zing, and hide behind the fact that, oh, well, other people use it, so I didn't mean anything by it, or I was joking. I can usually tell when someone has got some venom in what they're saying and how they're saying it.
Very different world. You arrived at the University of Iowa. When you arrived there, you were the man about town on campus. How many Valentine's Day cards did you receive back in the day?
Quite a few. Like we were a big deal in the state of Iowa. They had just gone to the Final Four and lost to the eventual NCAA champion Louisville. So they were on statewide television. It was Iowa Television Network. And to give you an example of how popular it was in the state, we would play little pickup games, just shirts and skins, no referees, no scoreboard, no uniforms. And we would play at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the football games would be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So people from all over the state would come in just to go, tailgating at the football in the football car park. And they would walk over to the gym and watch us play shirts and skins. And there would be 8,000 people watching us just play shirts and skins games. I never played in front of an empty seat when I was in school. We moved from an old arena to a new arena. So the old arena had 13,500 and the new arena had 17,000, Carver Hawkeye Arena. So in the whole 4 years, I never played in front of an empty seat. And it was just crazy, So Valentine's Day, there were so many letters on my locker that, I couldn't see the mirror. You have a locker with the big long mirror in front. I couldn't see the mirror, and it was overflowing onto the floor. And so it was messy. So the coach wasn't real happy with it. So I had someone who had to be assigned to my letters. So it didn't make a mess of the locker room.
You asked if I've ever had a locker with a mirror in it. No, I haven't. So no, I have no idea what you're talking about, but it sounds incredible. Yeah. So race relations was still very strained while you were at university. Did you experience any blatant racism in the locker rooms?
No. I mean, I think that, like unlike my parents, there's a lot more racial tension, in their generation. And, it was a lot less when I came, and it was kind of like in Iowa, there was a lot of racism. I've got maybe make sure I stay on track, but I got a funny story for you. When I was playing at Iowa, one of my teammates was from Iowa City. And so we would play inter squad games all around the state. So people from, different parts of Iowa could get a chance to watch us play live if they couldn't make it all the way to Iowa City. So we're playing in this city called Marshalltown, Iowa. And even though it was a high school gym, it was a big gym. They played in this thing called the Roundhouse, and it had a capacity of 5,000 people. And so we're playing there, and one of my teammates from Iowa City, and he was my roommate my freshman year, his name was Mark Gannon, and his uncle was from Marshalltown. So he came to the game, and I'm telling you, he was like a farmer, overalls, hat. I imagine him still having like a hayseed hanging out of his mouth, but I might be exaggerating there. But he was about as like an Iowa farm boy as you could possibly get. So he he comes into the locker room after the game. Our team's probably 60% black and 40% white at the time. And so we're all in the locker room together. And so his uncle comes in, because, people's families were allowed to come in, especially in the in the preseason. It wasn't as intense. So there's some people from some boosters from the area, and there's Mark Gannon's uncle. So he walks in, he's got his overalls on, he's got his thumbs tucked behind the straps, and he was like, so excuse it doesn't sound the same unless I say the word, so give me a pass on this one. He was like, he looked around real proud and said, "Oh, your niggers played well tonight." Like it was a compliment. It caught all of everybody, the white, black, it caught us all by surprise. We were like, did he? Yeah, I think he did, So there was racism there, but I think it was, he didn't mean anything by it. That's he was completely ignorant. But, there were times when we would leave campus and, people didn't care, if you were popular in the state of Iowa, they let it be known that they didn't really approve of you being in their town. But for the most part, I think my Iowa experience was, no matter how much racism there was in the state of Iowa, I think it got downplayed a lot. I think it was Do the Right Thing, when they were having this race riot, and he's like, I don't understand. You can't stand black people, but your favorite athlete is Michael Jordan. It's like, oh yeah, but that's different. So I think that we kind of fell under that umbrella of we were adored as Iowa athletes, and we got a bit of a pass for not being the right race.
So you were adored as an Iowa athlete so much that you were contacted by the Hobart Tassie Devils in Australia to come and play in the National Basketball League. When you first got that call from someone at the Hobart Tassie Devils, did you have any idea where Hobart was?
No, no, I didn't. I think I wasn't even aware that there was an island, that was below the mainland in Australia. I did know that there was a country named Australia, and never thought I would ever get there. But I was always fascinated by the things that I had heard. But like any American, I shouldn't say any American, but most Americans, I was very ignorant of anything outside of America. So when I was told that I was being recruited by this team from Hobart, which was in Tasmania, and when they described it to me, it was this beautiful island south of the mainland, which it is. But in my mind, they were saying it's this beautiful island. I knew that Australia was famous for its beaches and beautiful weather. And excuse me. And so I thought, wow, it must be like Hawaii. And it wasn't. It is beautiful, but it's nothing like Hawaii. The weather's nothing like it. So I was in for a real shock when I got there. I had no idea, and I had no idea they drove on the left-hand side of the road. And I had no idea what root meant. Like I asked our first function, I asked, there was a lot of words like that. I asked these ladies that were at one of our opening functions to introduce the team. I said, "Oh, are you going to root for us?" And they looked at each other like, "Wow, this guy's forward." I'm pretty sure one of them said, "Well, can you buy me a drink first?" So it was interesting, very interesting.
Does sound interesting. Tasmania is definitely not Hawaii.
No.
So how did you see, when you touched down in Australia, how did you see race relations in Australia with white Australians and Aboriginals compared to America?
Well, I thought the Indigenous people were very similar to the Native Americans in America. So there was that whole, fitting in with their cult, with the culture that, we're all a part of, to go be educated, to go to university, to get jobs, to have a mortgage, all those things that, are regular in our society and not necessarily um, regular in their in their culture, how they were brought up, what their culture is from. So I think that it was very similar. So it was kind of like I was always kind of throwing those parallels together with the indigenous people of Australia and Native Americans of America. So that was kind of where I saw that. But as far as racism goes, and I still believe this to this day, there's racism wherever you go. Whether it is the difference between cultures, religion, color of skin. I think that there's always going to be those differences, and when people don't understand someone's culture or someone's race, or someone's upbringing, even socioeconomic differences. Like people that are from a family that have been on the dole for 3 generations compared to a family that has been educated through private schools and have had the fortunate upbringing of being able to provide for their families and for generations. There's a lot of differences between those two cultures. So I think that there's always going to be difference like that. But I think that what the difference is in America with I shouldn't just say racism, but people's tolerance of others that are different. It is that if, say, for example, someone says, "Oh, I don't like Chinese people," and then there's a Chinese couple that come to your house that's a friend of a friend, and they're at a dinner party and they're having a good chat. I don't think that I've met one Australian that doesn't judge that person for who they are on that night. Like, "Oh, I feel like this about this certain group, but so I can't stand that person no matter what they do or say." I've never met an Australian that is that hell bent on their prejudice or their racism to just a blanket. "I can't stand anyone, doesn't matter what they say or do." I've never really met anyone like that in Australia, and I've met plenty of people like that in America.
I don't think I've met anyone like that in Australia either.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your kids earlier, Clayton and Bronte. Do you think the world looks different to your kids than it did for you in terms of opportunities for kids of colour to get ahead in the world?
I think that it's a definite, it was a lot easier for me than it was for my parents, but I think it's easier in some ways for the kids. But I mean, this is a tough world to try and succeed in. The population, the competitiveness of being educated and the jobs that are available. And definitely now in this world that we're living under these conditions, it makes it very difficult for to get employment that is going to provide for a family, buy a house with the prices that it takes to be able to get a bank loan under these trying circumstances. There are some things that are a lot more difficult for them than it was for me growing up and trying to establish myself and provide for a family. There are a lot bigger challenges for them, but at the same time, it's like they get to do it on an equal playing field. So in no way, shape, or form are they discriminated against to where it makes it difficult for them to succeed. If they educate themselves and work hard, they have just as good a chance to succeed as anyone else does in any race or uh, any socioeconomic background. There's the same opportunities. If that's what you want, you're able to get it. And so I think that on that playing field, on that platform, there's lots of equality. And then on the other platforms, I think that they got it a lot easier because, like I said before, they're looked at like they're exotic. They're not looked at like they don't fit in on either culture. They fit in everywhere. Everybody wants to hang with them.
That's very cool. I've heard a lot of people talk about race relations, and that's probably one of the coolest things I've heard, that your children are growing up in a world where everything's fair game, everything's equal opportunities. So tell me about Clayton and Bronte. Are they happy little Australians, or do they wish they'd been born in America?
Oh, 100% Australians. They loved it. Like Clayton, at one point in time, he wanted to go to play college basketball in America. And I think a lot of that was just he saw some games of mine and saw me playing in front of 20,000 people and the starting lineups and it's pretty cool, like to be able to see that, to see his father play under those circumstances, and the stories that I would tell him or he'd hear my roommate from college and I chatting on FaceTime, and it sounds really fun. Like we've got a great relationship. I've got a great relationship with several of my teammates that I went to school with. So I think that he really thought, wow, that would really be cool to play in that environment. So at one point he wanted to go over to America, but when he went over there, he didn't like it. He was in LA, went to my old high school, and there are a lot of things that are very difficult. Like it's very competitive. It's very cutthroat. People would like steal your shoes, steal your money, steal your bag. Do things that try and make you late for practice, so the coach would get mad at you. You wouldn't start the next game. You had to persevere through that. And he has a great lifestyle in Australia. So he was like, Dad, I know that you came over. I basically resigned from my television job just to go over there and support him and help him get through that. And if that's what he wanted, I was going to be there to help him achieve it. But he was like, oh, would you be upset with me if I went back to Australia? I said, well, I completely get it. So, here we are back in Australia again. And I had a feeling that he wouldn't like it as much as his lifestyle here in Australia. But, like it's one thing to tell him that. It's another thing to actually live it and really have that cemented in your mind that he's very fortunate to be living here in Australia. I mean, like he's a good looking kid, looks like his body was built in a laboratory. Does commercials, he's on an ad for Love Island right now. Yeah, he's got his shirt off. He does Rebel ads. He does Powerade ads, and he's a personal trainer in Bondi, right on the water. He's got a great lifestyle. And my daughter has never for once thought that she wanted to live in America. So they are 100% Australian and loving it.
It's a very cool story. So what did your parents tell you about goal setting when you were a kid? Did they tell you could be anything you wanted? Or was it a bit more realistic in America back then as a black kid trying to get ahead?
I think that my parents, what they instilled in me was that, if you want something bad enough, then you have to put the work in. Now, my parents weren't real communicators. I was the youngest of three, and I pretty much had to, watch my siblings, and, like we weren't allowed to speak back to my parents, like that, that whole speak your mind to your parents thing, that just didn't happen in our house. They would just give you that look. My mother ruled the house with a look. She did, and I can't even remember how many times my mother or my father would say, "Watch your tone." Like you weren't even allowed to say like what. You couldn't say what. It had to be pardon me, excuse me. It was a very strict household. But For me, it was quite evident, and I think that my older brother had a lot to a lot to do with the successes that I had, was because he set the benchmark pretty high. He was drafted by the Golden State War, no, sorry, the Baltimore Orioles out of high school in baseball. Then he went on to play basketball at the University of Southern California on a basketball scholarship, and then he was drafted by the Golden State Warriors after he left college. So he was drafted into professional sports. And growing up behind that, he's like a natural athlete. Never been to the driving range, single figure handicap golfer. I mean, who does that? Never goes to a bowling alley, rolls a 200, like straight away, no technique, no lessons, no ball of his own, just a natural athlete. So I grew up behind that. So that was, I wanted to be as good as my brother. Now, he would show me how to do things, but because things came so naturally for him, if he said, all right, you got to make 10 free throws before you go in the house, he'd make 10. And then I would make 10 in a row, but it would take me an hour and a half before I would be able to achieve that. Now, in the end, it was a blessing because I knew how to work hard. I knew how to push through the barrier of, I fell in love with the process. It wasn't just the goal. It wasn't just, the achievements or the goals. Once I achieved those goals, okay, now I can be happy. I would be passing people up every summer because I worked harder than they did. Like we would get to the park and I would have been there shooting around already. They would leave and I would continue to shoot. And I loved it. I loved passing those guys up. That guy was better than me beginning of the summer. That guy's not as good as me now. And then it was that whole, like how I mentioned, I wasn't really accepted by the white community. I wasn't really accepted by the Black community either. So like when I went and played in a pickup game and they gave me that look like, who's this Mexican looking guy? I got him. Yeah. Like looking at me like with no respect. And I learned very early that I couldn't get distracted mentally by talking or getting emotional. So I would really just have, a poker face when I played. But my mind was, for all of those little, racial innuendos that were thrown at me on the basketball court or on the baseball field or on the football field, that was where I could zing them back. And I wouldn't even have to say anything. Somebody would be disrespectful. Yeah, I got this clown. And before they knew it, I had 20. Bang, like take that. And that was my motivation. I don't know if that's healthy, but that was my motivation, to destroy any race that came at me. I had a lot of animosity boiled up inside of me. And that was how I took it out on people.
Sounds healthy to me. So what have you told your own kids about goal setting? Do you tell them they can be anything they want?
Oh, absolutely. Like Clayton was never good at school. So, and Bronte's was better at school. So, unfortunately, when you have two kids and one of them struggles, even both of them might be struggling, but one of them really struggles and the other one doesn't struggle as much, you don't tend to give the other one as much parenting as you do the other one. So I would say that Bronte kind of missed out a little bit on things because we were so busy trying to get Clayton through his day. It's funny because he's really got himself together now. But man, when he was young, he was a challenge to parent. But I think my kids, they have understood and they've watched their mother and I aren't together anymore, but we've always focused on the kids. And I think our message to them was that there are going to be tough times. Don't think that you're going to reach this pinnacle and it's going to be all right. Once I get this car, everything is going to be cool. Once I have this holiday, then I'll be happy. Once I have this job and I make good money, then I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be set. I said, like our message has been that life's always going to throw some obstacles at you. And it's how you deal with that and how you persevere through those problems and how you can go about tough times and still be positive, and still feel like you've achieved something as you're starting to pick at a problem. You haven't quite conquered it yet, but as you're that you can have that good feeling, to be happy with little things, like the company of your friends, or a job well done, or not being able to figure something out, and then when you finally do, that feeling that you have. Like, I think that those are the type of things that we've tried to instill in our children, in Bronte and Clay. And I'm not going to sit here and take full credit for that, because it's been a team effort with with Nikki and I. Even though we're not together, we've been apart for 11 years, and we still come together on those decisions. We still chat when the kids are faced with a challenge, and we still work as a team.
Lucky kids. Steve CARFINO, you're a really good man. Thank you so much for joining me on Everyday Greatness.
My pleasure. Anytime for you, Barnes.
Oh, stop it. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Eleanor, for joining me on Everyday Greatness. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to the ARA Group for being our major sponsor for the 4th year in a row. Thank you to Cherry Civil for sponsoring this episode. Thank you to Look Studio Australia for recording this episode. And I hope that when you lift your head up, I hope when you put your device down, you lift your head up, push your shoulders back, and walk down the street proud of being an everyday Joe Bag of Donuts. I hope you can join us next episode, where I'll be speaking to State Sales Manager at Medtronic Diabetes, Lee Johnston, and Tim Aliff, the Manager of Television and Video at ABC News and the author of crime thriller trilogy, The Enemy Within. I'll be talking to them both about authentic leadership in business. If you want to find out more, please go to our website, www.everydaygreatness.com.au, or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or LinkedIn. Thank you again, Steve and Eleanor, and thank you all for joining me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Everyday Greatness, proudly brought to you by major sponsor ARA Group. If you'd like to stay up to date, check out our pages on Facebook and Instagram, or to listen to more episodes, go to everydaygreatness.com.au or wherever you get your podcasts.